A lot of times we want to generate a user interface or only the back end of an application understands what user interface to generate. There are cases where that's not true, where we know on the front end, but one of the things that we a lot of times want to do is decouple the model for what we're going to display from like the data model or the control model. And so adaptive cards are a way, they were originally designed really, I think in a lot of ways, to generate widgets that go inside a conversational flow, like in Teams or a bot or like on Windows, different versions of Windows or on the Mac. They had this notion of creating all kinds of widgets, right? You also see this on iOS devices and on Android devices where you don't just have an icon for an application. You've got this little pluggable UI, and adaptive cards are a way to do that. It lets you, through a JSON library, you describe kind of what that UI is going to look like, what events it's going to take care of, and it's up to the user interface to actually interpret what that means. So it sends you back JSON, and then it's rolled up onto the user interface, and that could be a fat app, it could be a web app, or it could be mobile app. And so these adaptive cards are pretty slick. Like I said, Microsoft's been using them for a while. You also see them in other places. One of the things I've also seen is building an application because you can decouple the user interface construction and what widgets to use from the definition of the user interface and the definition of the interaction. Let me see if I can make this bigger. So in this case, I'm just going to do it as Flutter. I'm going to show you an example in a minute. That's a Flutter application that runs adaptive cards. So all the widgets in the Flutter app are actually generated from a set of cards, and basically it's somewhat compatible with this Microsoft standard, so you can take Microsoft samples and paste them in and they work. So the user interacts with the user interface. The browser actually submits some kind of request, in this case to a Flutter app. And if you didn't have, and so it depends, right? So in a mobile app, this Flutter app would actually be in the device, and I guess it would actually be in the device also in the web, right? It would get downloaded as part of the web package. So really the Flutter app, the client, or browser device, and the user are all outside the API boundary. And what you can do from any of these things is you can obviously make API calls from the web app or the mobile app, and it goes all the way to the back end and returns results. In these applications, though, the other option is you can actually end up with something called a flow service. So I have this card. Let me see if I can find the card, right? I have these cards, and I don't know which card to show based on a user action, or maybe I don't know whether they want the 5-day weather forecast or the 4-day weather forecast plus today's is a much larger one, right? And so we have to decide what fields, which markup, which adaptive card we're going to use, and what's going to be enabled and disabled in that. And let's say we're doing a tax program, right? So and I used this one before. What people are going to be on this taxes? Who's the primaries? Who are the dependents, right? And so we're going to generate user interfaces for those dependents and for the primary based on the way some questions are answered. That can be enable, disable. It can also be cards. We could say, hey, this person, we need their basic information, personally identifiable information. And so we could turn on or it could be based on their age, right? If they're under a certain age, we don't need to ask certain questions. So we can enable and disable that, but the one way we can also do that is not build that directly in the user interface, and we build a flow service, and the flow service has the ability to turn on and off those modules. Do we need to know this adulthood kind of stuff, or are we good enough with the kids' data? Do we need to know their address? Oh, they live with their parents to be declared a dependent, right? And so the application actually can call a flow service with the data. The flow service says, oh, we've still got these 3 other things we need to know about this person. We're going to return an adaptive card back with that, right? And so the flow services could make API calls. The UI could make API calls. The UI could get an adaptive card back and display to user interface. And then based on user action or that card, they could populate that data with something else, right? Especially if you did a template. And we can create a widget tree from that adaptive card, and then that gets returned back to the browser. So I'm going to show you a quick example of this adaptive card because, man, that was all very wordy. And so this is an adaptive card demo. This one's actually in Flutter, but there are other demos. You can actually use the designer instead of this, and I probably should have. And so I'm just going to pick a couple of these. So we can take, just a text block, right? So this is actually 11 different cards, right? Each one of these cards, debug's turned on so I can show you the JSON. So this is just a bunch of text blocks, 11 different cards, and each one of these slightly different, right? So this one here is a single card with 3 rows in it, 3 row cards in it, I would imagine, and each of those row cards has a different alignment. Let me look. We get a body that's a text block with the cat in it, and then we get another text block with the cat in it, and we get another image, and why those are all in different rows because we didn't put them in a column markup. So we actually in this could have said, hey, these are all in a column, and they would have all been right next to each other. But the idea though, right, is that basically any of these, if I were to go back and pick a different one, I can do this table one. So we get this table, and it turns out that there's an adaptive card for a table, right? It doesn't give you as much fine-grained control as a style sheet, but basically you would apply style sheets in your application. And then of course you can also do, well, this is just the Flutter thing. So this is a table. There are a bunch of other examples in here. What is the show sample card wizard? Oh, this shows actually a set of cards that you can keep entering data, and as you enter data, it adds more cards, it expands it out and shows you more data. So again, adaptive cards are a cool way to deliver kind of implementation, independent UI specification, and you can deploy these in a bunch of different ways. The example I did was the adaptive card Flutter repo, which is here. It's actually mine, but it's a fork of somebody else's work from 3 years ago. And then there are all kinds of really good samples on GitHub for adaptive cards. And like I said, they also have this designer. So that's adaptive cards that let you build a dynamic user interface that is sort of implementation independent. You can deliver those cards across work streams, and they're useful for widgets, and you can also use them for large applications. Have a great day.